It's time for us to begin this morning. If you want to come in and have a seat. It is a blessing to be home. You know, it was a good trip and everything went well, but 20 hours on an airplane in a seat that's half your size, it was not looked forward to before I left. It was not looked forward to get home, but it was worth the price to get to be back in your presence today. It truly is a great blessing to be back together as the brothers and sisters here at West Hill, and thankful for the prayers and the thoughts, and had people texting me also, and taking care of Julie. I mean, there was just a lot of things that were happening. Of course, a lot of things happened here while I was gone, and we hired someone, we baptized some people and new members, and one of the brethren in New Zealand said, "Man, it sounds like you need to stay here and not go home." y'all were doing a bang-up job here without me, but good to be here. If you have your Bibles, turn to Numbers chapter 22. Numbers chapter 22. There's the account of Balaam and his donkey, King Balak, king of the Moabites, occurs here in Numbers chapter 22 and following through chapter 24. It resonates with us, I think, partly because of Mr. Ed, the talking horse, and we think, here's a talking donkey. Maybe it resonates with us more because we see some of our ideas and some of ourselves in Balaam himself, or we see ourselves in Balak, who was afraid of his enemy, or better yet, we see us as the product and the object of God's love and concern. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to us most. The people of Israel are moving throughout the Sinai Peninsula, the wilderness wanderings, if you will. The time in which they've gone, they've spied out the land, they've come back, and they said, "We can do this," or Joshua and Caleb said, "We can do this, let's go." And the rest of them said, "There ain't no way we can do this. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. We can't stand against them. We cannot expect to be victorious." And so God caused them to wander 1 year for every day they were spying out the land. 40 days, 40 years of wandering. When we go back in Bible history, we refer to this as the period of the wilderness wanderings. 40 years. 40 years in which an entire generation from age 20 and upward passes away. 20 years, or 40 years in which the children of Israel, they had longed for the promised land. They were desiring the fulfillment of the promise that was made to Abraham. "Unto you and your generations I will give this land." They had spent years, 430 years in the land of Egypt. God brought them out with a strong hand. They're wanting that promised land. They want to realize the land that flows with milk and honey. They have heard about it. And everyone from 20 years and upward will die, except who? Joshua and Caleb. That's right. Kind of a tragic story or tragic event to look at it. But during that time, they are faced with a lot of opposition. Opposition from the Amorites, who in chapter 21 we see the Amorites coming against them, and yet they're victorious. God gives them a victory. Amalek fights against them, but God gives them victory. And here we see the Moabites. Who were the Moabites? Descendants of who? Lot, that's right. Descendants of Lot. Genesis chapter 19, verses 37 and 38. Lot, remember, after he has left the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, we find him in the caves of Zoar, and he is drunken one night. His daughters commit incest with him. They had the thing planned out. And one of them has a son named Ben-Ami, who becomes the father of the Ammonites, and the son Moab, who becomes the father of the Moabites. There is a somewhat close kindred between them. God has the nation of Israel look out for the Moabites and look out for the Ammonites, but if they're going to attack them, then certainly they would be allowed to defend themselves. So in chapter 22 and verse 1, the people of Israel set out and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was in great dread of the people because there were many. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, "This horde will now lick up all that is around us as the ox licks up the grass in the field." And so the children of Moab are terrified to see the children of Israel camping in their land. If you were looking at a map of the land of Palestine, you would see the Sea of Galilee flowing into the Jordan River down to the Dead Sea. The land of the Promised Land would go from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. I'll try to draw this backwards so you can see it in this strip over here. But on the other side of the Jordan River, you had the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the other nations. And it's there, as they are looking across the Jordan at the city of Jericho, which would have been just a bit north of the Dead Sea and inland just a little bit. They're looking at the land that they're going to take, and the Moabites see this and they're afraid. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of resources. That's a lot of power. They can overthrow us, as they say, lick us up as the grass of the field. That's one of the things that we see when it comes to an army besieging or encamped in an area is the resources it takes to sustain an army. Years ago, it was stated that an army travels on its what? Its stomach. During the Revolutionary War and during the Civil War, both, families were decimated, destroyed. Farms, came to nothing because an army marched down the road in front of their farm. The soldiers would peel out of ranks and go over and pick an apple off the apple tree. But you're not talking one or two soldiers. You're talking thousands of soldiers. If they saw a cow in the field, they would go and slaughter it and cook it for dinner that night. And so they were, in essence, licking up everything around them. They were consuming all the resources. And once they consumed it, they would move to the next section and they would consume all the resources there and move a little further and consume even more. So one of the hardest parts about the American Revolution and the Civil War was sustaining an army that was moving around in the same region over and over and over again so that the resources couldn't even be replenished. That's exactly what Moab is looking at here. This horde will now lick up all that is around us as the ox licks up the grass of the field. So Balak, the son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the people. Called to him, "Behold, a people has come out of the land of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are dwelling opposite us. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." He believes that Balaam is a prophet. From everything that we can see, Balaam knows God to a certain extent. He knows at least of the God of the Israelites. Is this a man who, like the witch of Endor, had for years fooled the people, like Simon the sorcerer of Acts chapter 8, tricked the people into believing that he was some great thing, and then it just so happened on the day that he is seeking wisdom against, or seeking advice against the children of Israel, God actually answers him in truth? Maybe is this his first real revelation from God? Or is it the case that he really is a prophet of God and has been able to speak with God? We certainly see people in the Old Testament who are outside the nation of Israel who knew God. Do we not see people like that? Melchizedek, one of the prime examples of that. Abraham, who is the father of the nation, comes to Melchizedek and offers sacrifice and tithes to Melchizedek. Melchizedek is referred to as the king of peace. He's also referred to as the king of righteousness in the book of Hebrews. He was, even though we don't know a lot about everything, the background and everything concerning Melchizedek, we do know that he was not a Hebrew, he was not a Jew, and yet he still worshiped God and served Jehovah. Is it possible that Balaam is outside of the nation of Israel but still has a relationship with God? Yes, that is possible. We've seen that in other places in history. Is it possible that outside the nation of Israel he is still a prophet of God? Yes, Melchizedek was a prophet of God, and so it is possible that that's true too. It's also possible that Balaam receives his first revelation ever in his life in this context. Certainly, he doesn't understand everything about Israel and what is happening, but he has evidently blessed and cursed enough peoples that the king of Moab, Balak, thinks, if I can get this guy on my side, maybe I can be victorious. Yes, this people, notice what he calls them. He says, a people has come out of the land of Egypt. Again, down in verse 11, behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They've been gone 430 years, the Israelites have. They may not even know exactly what people it is. He just knows there's these gypsies that showed up on our land yesterday, and they're eating everything in sight. A people has come up out of the land of Egypt. So the elders of Moab, the elders of Midian, departed with the fees for divination. This is what makes me think that he may be doing this more as a lucrative business as opposed to actually being a prophet of God. Fees for divination. What's it cost to get a prophecy? Saul went to the witch of Endor. In Acts chapter 16, remember there was the girl with the spirit of divination, and when Paul cast the demons out, what happens? Yeah, her masters weren't happy and have Paul thrown in jail because he has taken away their livelihood, their money, their source of income. They're charging fees for divination. So they send this to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. And he said to them, lodge here tonight, and I will bring back to you word as the Lord speaks to me. So the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam, and God came to Balaam and said, who are these men with you? And Balaam said to God, Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent to me, saying, behold, the people came out of Egypt. And he repeats the story to God. I like that Balaam, for whatever reasons we may not like Balaam, he's at least truthful. He doesn't try to hide the fact of what he's doing. These are men, they've come to me, they've asked me to curse this people that come out of Egypt, and I'm coming to you, I'm asking you, can I curse them for a certain amount of money, for the price which they are giving me? God said to Balaam, verse 12, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the princes of Balak, "Go to your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." And the princes of Moab rose and went to Balak and said, "Balaam refuses to come with us." And there's this sense of dejection. We can't be victorious. We can't fight this battle. We can't make a step because Balaam has refused to come with us. Where does their faith seem to be? Their faith appears to be in Balaam, doesn't it? Not so much in God or even in their false gods that they might worship, but their faith is in Balaam. Balaam is not coming, therefore we cannot win. We can't hope to win. So once Balak hears this, he sends more people to Balaam. More honorable, it says in verse 15, more honorable than these. Another envoy with more honor, likely with more money. They come to Balaam and they said, "Thus says Balak the son of Zippor, let nothing hinder you from coming to me. For I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me I will do. Come and curse this people for me. I'll give you whatever you want. Name your price." Now, one who truly knew God and understood God and His reasoning knows that God's mind is not changed. Not in that sense. How much money can you offer God to get Him to change His mind? It would take more than we have, wouldn't it? Think of the statement that is made in Isaiah 40 talking about God when He says, "Look, all the land is mine. I can roll it up into a ball, make an altar out of it, burn every tree on the earth, and sacrifice every animal on that altar. And it's not enough to bring the honor that I deserve." There's not money enough to get God to change His mind. But Balaam answered and said, though Balak were to give me a house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now, there's a man who understands that money cannot set us at odds with God. Money cannot be the reason we're set at odds with God. And yet there are some in the Lord's church. It doesn't take a house full of silver or gold for them to challenge what God has said. Hebrews 10:25 tells us to do what? Or not to do what? Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as some do. Now, obviously, there are legitimate reasons for missing services. We're not talking about things like that, but forsaking the assembly is not just about your presence here or not here. Forsaking the assembly is about an attitude of putting trivial and minor things ahead of the Lord's church and His assembly. That's right. Some do this. This was a problem in the first century. It was a problem in the second century, in the third and fourth and fifth, and here we are in the 21st century, and it continues to be a problem today. Christians sometimes, unfortunately, are willing to put trivial things ahead of God, and when could be at services, choose not to be. And there are all kinds of excuses. But notice what he says here. You could give me a house full of gold and silver, and that's not going to make it to where I can go beyond or do less than what God tells me. In other words, no matter what you give to me, I can still only bless or curse those that God allows me to bless or curse. So you too, please stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. And God came to Balaam that night in verse 20 and said to him, If the men have come to call you, rise and go with them, but only do what I tell you. So Balaam arose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the princes of Moab. Now, God does not give Balaam leave to curse the nation of Israel. He gives him leave to go with these men if they are still calling. Why would God give him leave to go with the men if he's not going to allow him to curse the Israelites? He wants what? Okay, to teach him a lesson. I would also say teach them a lesson. It's one thing to send word back and forth, no, I can't do it. It's another to stand in the presence of King of Balak, or King Balak of Moab, and say, here's what God has said, and I've got to follow that. That is a tremendous lesson for the king to hear, to know that God is in control and God makes these decisions. God's anger was kindled because he went and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way. But God said, if they ask you to go, go. So why is he angry that he went? Isn't that what it says? God came to Balaam at night in verse 20. If the men have come to call you, rise, go with them, but only do what I tell you. Sounds like God tells Balaam to go, and then it says, since he went, God was angry. Nancy? Okay, which instance of Abraham are you referring to? Okay. So you suppose this was a test for Balaam to see how Balaam would react? That's true, he knew. Does it seem unfair that God would become angry? Nancy? That's kind of the way I see it. That God had already given Balaam an answer, and now, because more money is involved, Balaam is coming back and saying, God, will you change your mind now? and that to me seems more like the reason why God is angry. But yeah, maybe it's a test. For whatever reason, God doesn't like it. And so it says that an angel of the Lord, because he went, the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as his adversary. Now he was riding on the donkey, and the two servants were with him. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. And the donkey turned aside out of the road and went into a field. And Balaam struck the donkey to turn her into the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards, with a wall on either side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed against the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck her again. Then the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and all of a sudden, the story gets interesting. A talking donkey. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey and said, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" And it doesn't appear that Balaam is too shocked. The first words out of my mouth are not going to be the same thing that Balaam is saying. Balaam acts as though this is normal. Yeah, sure, donkeys talk all the time. Why, we had a conversation yesterday. This is not odd. Balaam answered and said, "Because you have made a fool of me." Do y'all remember Mr. Ed? I know you do. And when the neighbors would see him talking to the horse, and they thought him to be a fool because he was talking to a horse, and he thought his horse was talking back. Balaam says, "You have made a fool of me." Not in that I'm talking to a donkey. That wasn't the foolish thing to him. But the foolish thing was that I wanted you to go straight, and you turned aside, you scraped my leg against the wall, you sat down underneath me. You have made me into a fool. I wish I had a sword in my hand, for then I would kill you. Well, guess what? There is a sword available. It was in the angel's hand. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all the days, all your life to this day? Is it my habit to treat you this way? And he said, no. And the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down and fell on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to oppose you because your way is perverse before me. You're angry with the donkey for what he has done to you. God says, I'm angry with you because your way before me has been perverse. The donkey saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let her live. It's a good thing there was not a sword in his hand, because he would have killed the donkey. And it's a good thing the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, because the angel of the Lord would have killed Balaam had he continued on the course. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the road against me. Now therefore, if it is evil in your sight, I will turn back. And the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only the word that I tell you. So Balak went with the princes of Balak. In the book of Revelation, in the 7 churches of Asia, a couple of the churches follow the doctrine of Balaam. Do you remember that statement? What is the doctrine of Balaam? Okay. They serve for the money that they can make. Greed. The doctrine of Balaam is about greed. It's about, I'll see if I can change the mind of God for a certain amount of money. I will curse this people for a certain amount of money. When God says to Balaam, no, that should have been the end of it. But when more money is added, Balaam is ready to, reconvene counsel with God. Okay, now they've doubled their offer, God. Do you still say no? God says no. God, they have now tripled their offer, God. Is your answer still no? The answer is still no. How often money becomes that thing that we're willing to give up or change. If we, you hear of congregations of the Lord's church that are willing to change the doctrine of Christ because it'll get more people in the building, which will bring in more money, which means we can support more missionaries and we can do more things with more money. You see how money becomes part of the problem. It's not hard to see congregations of the Lord's church how they might give in to money that way, is it? To give in to the doctrine of Balaam. Balaam's certainly struggling with it, and when we saw churches in the first century struggling with it, we can also see churches today struggling with the same thing. How do we stop that? Well, I don't think we are called to wait for talking donkeys. I don't think we need the revelation of God like that. We have the revelation of God here that's necessary. We need to read the book and see what God says. That's essentially what Balaam needed, was to follow what God had already said. Money does not change the doctrine of God. Money does not change the will of God. It may change man's mind, but it certainly doesn't change God's mind. So chapter 23 comes these oracles of Balaam. He rides on with the men to Balak. And he gets up that morning, in chapter 23. Balaam said to Balak, "Build for me here 7 altars and prepare me here 7 bulls with 7 rams." And Balak did as Balaam said. Balak and Balaam offered on each altar a bull and a ram. And Balaam said to Balak, "Stand beside your burnt offering, and I will go. Perhaps the Lord will come to meet me, and whatever he shows me, I will tell you." And he went to a bare height, and God met Balaam. And Balaam said to him, "I have arranged the 7 altars. I have offered on each altar a bull and a ram." And the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, "Return to Balak, and thus shall you speak." And he returned to Balak, and behold, he and all the princes of Moab were standing beside his burnt offering. And Balaam took up his discourse and said, here's the first oracle that Balaam speaks for Balak. Now remember, Balak is expecting a curse upon the children of Israel. That's what he wants. That's what he's paid good money for. That's what he has brought Balaam here to do. "From Aram, Balak was brought to me, the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come curse Jacob for me, and come denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the crags I see him, from the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone and not counting itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like his." Instead of cursing the nation of Israel, Balaam, overcome by the speech of God, blesses the nation of Israel and not the nation of Moab. And Balak says to Balaam, "What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have done nothing but bless them." And he answered and said, "Must I not take care to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?" You remember those words were similar to the words of Peter and John in Acts chapter 5. Whether you judge us right or wrong, we must speak what we have both seen and heard. You may not like what we have to say, but we can simply tell you what God has commanded us to tell you. These are the words which we need to be speaking. Much like Balaam made this statement in verse 12, we must take care to speak what the Lord puts in our mouths. Peter would say in 1 Peter 4 and verse 11, we must speak as what? The oracles of God. The oracles, or the revelation which God has given to us, that is what we are called to speak. So Balak is upset. I brought you here to curse them. Instead, you came to bless them. Balaam says, I bless them because that's what God told me to do. Balak said to him, "Please come with me to another place from which you may see them. You shall see only a fraction of them and shall not see them all. Then curse them from me." Once you see how big they are, once you see how they're destroying our land, once you see how powerful they are, you will be afraid. Once you see them, then you can curse them from there. So he took them to the field of Zophim, to the top of Pisgah, and built 7 altars, and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Balaam said to Balak, "Stand here beside your burnt offering while I meet the Lord over there." And the Lord met Balaam and put a word in his mouth and said, "Return to Balak, and thus shall you speak." And he came to him. Behold, he was standing beside the burnt offering, and the princes of Moab were there with him again. And Balak said to him, "What has the Lord spoken?" And Balaam took up his discourse and said, notice, Balak is not really interested in what God said. He's more interested in whether or not he's going to be given what he wants. I mean, Balaam is actually telling him what God says. That's not what he wants. He wants approval for his desires. Some people want to live a life of sin. and they come to the preacher or they come to the elders and they say, here's what I want to do, and they want a blessing for their sin. And you tell them, look, you have free will. You can do that. But if you do that, you forfeit your opportunity to go to heaven. Well, no. I want to do this and go to heaven. Can't do that. Years ago, when I was still in Leonard, there was a lady who came and never met her before, and she knocked on the door and she said, look, here's the deal. I've committed adultery against my husband, and the man that I committed adultery with wants to get married to me. He's in the process of divorcing his wife now. When they get a divorce and we get married, can we go to heaven? And I said, no. And she said, well, you don't understand. That's what's going to make us happy. And I said, I understand that's what you think is going to happen, is you're going to be happy. But no, you can't go to heaven in that situation. Well, this is what we really want. She doesn't want to know what God's will is. What does she want? Yeah, she wants to be excused for the sin that she's committing. Balak does not want to know what the will of God is. He wants a pass on how he believes. But in the second oracle, Balaam says, rise, Balak, and hear and give ear to me, O son of Zippor. God is saying, listen to what I have to say. Don't just go by what you feel or what you want. Listen. God is not man that he should lie, or son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? Behold, I received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot revoke it. He has not beheld misfortune in Jacob, nor has he seen trouble in Israel. The Lord their God is with them. The shout of the king is among them. God brings them out of Egypt and is for them like the horns of the wild ox. There is no enchantment against Jacob, no divination against Israel. Now it shall be said of Jacob and Israel, what has God wrought? Behold, the people, as a lioness, it rises up. And as a lion, it lifts itself. It does not lie down until it devoured the prey and drunk the blood of the slain. Again, it is a blessing upon the nation of Israel. Balaam says, look, God has not prophesied against them. He has not seen sin and debauchery in the nation. He has brought them out of Egypt. He has protected them to this point, and He is going to protect them until they have devoured what God has given to them and drink the blood of the slain. Balak said to Balaam, do not curse them at all and do not bless them at all. Look, if you're not going to bless them, fine. But if you're not going to curse them, okay, I can live with that. But don't bless them. Just say nothing about them at all. But Balaam says, did I not tell you all that the Lord says to me that I must do? And Balak said to Balaam, come, I will take you to another place. Perhaps it will please God that you may curse them for me from there. If nothing else, Balak is determined. Unfortunately, he is determined to be on the side of the devil. When he hears that God is not on his side, he's quick to go find another view, another angle. Maybe if we do it this way, things will be different. We see that even in the church. There are some that are very zealous to do the devil's work. And then when God says, here's what I want you to do, they work hard in trying to get out of God's duty. They work hard trying to find an alternate way or do something else. There's more effort expended there than it is in doing God's work. So Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, which overlooks the desert. Balaam said to Balak, build for me here 7 altars. I find it interesting that each time Balaam says, well, we're going to do it the same way. Build the 7 altars, bring the bulls, bring the rams. Balak did exactly what he said he would do. Now they've built 21 altars. They've sacrificed 21 bulls, 21 rams. When Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to look for omens, But he set his face toward the wilderness, and Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camping, tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he took up his discourse and said, here's the third oracle of Balaam. The oracle of Balaam the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with his eyes uncovered. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, and your encampments, O Israel. Like palm groves that stretch afar, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt, and is for him like the horns of the wild ox. He shall eat up the nations as his adversary, shall break their bones in pieces, and pierce them through with his arrows. He crouched and laid down like a lion and like a lioness. Who will rouse him up? Blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you. So he gives this great blessing again to the nation of Israel. Balak is listening to this. The last thing he said is, if you're not going to curse them, at least don't bless them. Not only is he blessing them, he is blessing them to, notice verse 8, to devour or to eat up the adversaries, to break their bones in pieces, to pierce them through with arrows. He is like the lion who is ready to pounce. Deadly, mighty, strong. Blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you. And so now Balak has heard Balaam not only bless Israel, but curse the Moabites who stood against Israel. Balak's anger was kindled, verse 10. He struck his hands together, and Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee to your own place. I said, I will certainly honor you, but the Lord has held you back from honor. And Balaam said to Balak, did I not tell your messengers whom you sent to me? If Balak should give me his whole house full of silver and gold, I would not be able to go beyond the word of God, to do either good or bad of my own will. What the Lord speaks, that will I speak. And now behold, I am going to my people. Come, I will let you know what his people will do to your people in the latter days. And so here comes his final oracle. I'm going to my people. The people that God keeps blessing through him. And he took up his discourse. The oracle of Balaam the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is open, the oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down with his eyes uncovered. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of the Moab. It shall break down the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemy, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly, and one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. And he looked on Amalek, and he took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction. And he looked on the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, enduring in your dwelling places, and your nest is set in the rock. Nevertheless, Cain shall be burned, and Ashur shall take you away captive. And he took up his discourse and said, alas, who shall live when God does this? But the ship shall come from Kittim, and shall afflict Ashur and Eber, and he too shall come to utter destruction. Then Balaam arose and went back to his place, and Balak also went his way. The final oracle looks past the immediate future when the nation of Israel comes against Moab. It looks past the cleansing of the promised land and its occupation to what? What does he call it? I see one, but it's not now. Or I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. Who's he talking about? Jesus. He's looking way down into the future. He says, you want to talk about blessings and cursings? Here's the greatest blessing. A star is coming. Salvation will come to mankind. And all these nations, Moab, Sheth, Edom, Seir, Amalek, Kenites, the Kittim, the Asher, the Eber, all of them, they're going to fall before him. Now, certainly we need to be aware of the doctrine of Balaam, which is the doctrine that says money can change the mind of God. That somehow money becomes supreme and changes the way things shake out before God. They needed to be aware of it in the first century, in the churches of Asia. We need to be aware of it in the 21st century, the churches throughout the world today. But there are some great lessons from Balaam. To listen to what God has said and spoken and follow that to the best of our ability and speak only what God has spoken. Bless those that God has blessed and curse them not. Appreciate your attention. We'll pick up with the lesson next week. You're free for now.